She was the quiet new hire who always took the worst shifts and absorbed the head nurse's daily insults without a word. But when the hospital radios went dead, the sky went dark, and 8 military Black Hawks descended on a civilian parking lot, the staff didn't look to the chief of surgery. They looked to her. Mercy General Hospital sat in the sleepy, affluent suburb of Westfield, Connecticut, a Level 3 trauma center, which was a polite, bureaucratic way of saying they handled broken collarbones from high school football games, the occasional kitchen knife accident, and elderly patients who'd taken a bad fall down their carpeted stairs. The most action the emergency department saw on a typical Tuesday was a severe allergic reaction to a bee sting. Into this ecosystem of mundane medical care stepped Naomi Voss. Naomi was 34, though she carried a sort of ageless, exhausted quality that made her look either 25 or 40 depending on the light. She'd been hired 6 weeks earlier as a staff RN. Her file was aggressively unremarkable: a nursing degree from a mid-tier state school, a few years at a quiet clinic in the Midwest, and a vague gap in employment she attributed to caring for a sick relative. To the rest of the staff, she was practically invisible. The one who restocked the pediatric crash carts without being asked, the one who quietly mopped up vomit when janitorial was on break. She wore long-sleeved, slightly oversized navy scrubs, her dark hair pulled into a severe, utilitarian bun, and she was head nurse Denise Whitfield's favorite target. "Voss!" Denise snapped, her voice cutting through the low hum of the nurse's station. "Did you re-inventory the Pyxis in Bay 2? Because if I find one missing vial of fentanyl, I'm writing you up. Again." Naomi didn't look up from the chart she was organizing. "Yes, Denise. Inventory's logged, counts perfect." Her voice was soft, without a trace of edge. A tone that infuriated Denise, who thrived on conflict. "Well, go check it again," Denise ordered, "and take over bedpan duty in room 4. Dr. Reyes is doing a consult, and he doesn't want anyone distracting him." Dr. Julian Reyes was the department's golden boy, 32, an attending who never let anyone forget he'd completed a fellowship at Johns Hopkins, tailored scrubs, perfectly coiffed hair, and a habit of treating the nursing staff like slightly slow children put on earth to fetch his coffee and chart his brilliant deductions. Naomi simply nodded and stepped away from the desk, moving with a strange, fluid grace. A keen observer might have noticed her footsteps made no sound on the linoleum, or that her eyes constantly reflexively scanned the exits, the blind corners, the hands of everyone she passed. But there were no keen observers at Mercy General. 10 minutes later, she was quietly emptying a medical waste bin in Trauma Bay 1 when Dr. Reyes strutted in, trailed by a panting medical student. On the bed lay a 60-year-old man, minor fender bender. "Standard whiplash," Reyes was declaring to the student, barely glancing at the monitor. "Give him 800 milligrams of ibuprofen and discharge him. We need the bed." Naomi paused by the door and looked at the patient. Pale skin, cool to the touch. Breathing a fraction too shallow. Heart rate 105. Elevated, but plausible after a crash. Blood pressure 110/70. Fine on paper. But she saw the subtle distension in his abdomen, the way he favored his left side, the tight micro-expressions of pain around his eyes. "Excuse me, Dr. Reyes," she murmured, eyes lowered. "Would you like me to set up the ultrasound for a fast exam?" Reyes turned slowly, looking at her as if a piece of furniture had spoken. "A fast exam? For a 5-mile-an-hour rear-end collision? Nurse Voss, please leave the diagnostics to the doctors. You're wasting resources." "Of course, doctor." Her voice stayed soft. "It's just that his seatbelt bruising lines up with the lower left quadrant, and a heart rate of 105 with borderline pressure could point to early compensatory shock. A splenic microlaceration." The room went dead silent. The student stared. Reyes flushed a deep, ugly red. "Are you questioning my assessment?" "No, doctor." She retreated instantly into her shell of submissiveness. "I just thought a Hopkins man like yourself would want to be thorough, for the student's benefit." The flattery landed exactly where she'd aimed it. Reyes puffed his chest out, adjusting his stethoscope. "Well, yes, for the students. Go get the machine, Voss. Quickly." 2 minutes later, The wand slid over the patient's abdomen, and the color drained from Reyes's perfectly tanned face. A dark pool of free fluid around the spleen. The man was bleeding internally. If Reyes had sent him home, he'd have bled to death in his sleep. I caught it just in time," Reyes stammered to the student, recovering his bravado fast. "Get him to CT. Page general surgery. Good thing I double-checked." Naomi was already out the door, pushing her cleaning cart down the hall. She didn't need the credit. She just needed him to live. That was the rule she lived by now. Stay quiet, save who you can, and never, ever draw attention to yourself. But her quiet life was about to be obliterated. It started at 2:14 p.m. The ER was caught in the mid-afternoon lull. Denise online shopping at the desk. Reyes sipping an iced latte and complaining about his golf swing to a resident. Naomi methodically checking expiration dates on trauma shears in the supply closet. Then a low, subsonic vibration rattled the glass doors of the ambulance bay. It wasn't a sound, exactly, a pressure wave pushing against the eardrums, rattling the metal shelves around her. Naomi froze. Her hand stopped halfway to a box of bandages. Her posture changed instantly. The slump vanished, her spine snapping straight, her eyes processing the specific frequency of the vibration. High-yield explosives, deep underground, roughly 10 miles out. Seconds later, the hospital's radio console let out a piercing screech, then dead air. The police scanner, usually humming with traffic stops and domestic disputes, went completely silent. "What in the world was that?" Denise muttered, pulling off her reading glasses. "Construction on the interstate?" "That wasn't construction," Naomi said. Before Denise could reprimand her for speaking out of turn, the red emergency phone on the wall began to scream. Marcus, the charge nurse, picked it up. "Mercy General ER, charge speaking." He listened for 3 seconds. The blood drained from his face. His hand shook so violently the receiver rattled against his ear. Say that again? How many?" He hung up slowly and turned to the room. "That was County Dispatch. There's been an incident at the Blue Ridge facility." Reyes scoffed. "Blue Ridge? That old industrial park by the ridge? What, a forklift exploded?" "Blue Ridge isn't a civilian industrial park, Doctor," Naomi said, and the voice was entirely different now. Gone was the soft, submissive whisper. This one was clipped, cold, resonant. "It's a leased facility for Lockheed Martin's Advanced Projects Division, a DARPA testing ground." Everyone stopped and stared at the mousy new nurse. Denise frowned. "How on earth do you know that, Voss?" Marcus didn't give her a chance to answer. "Listen to me. Route 9 bridge is out. Structural collapse. The city's Level 1 trauma center is completely cut off from the blast zone. We're the closest hospital." "Okay," Reyes said, rubbing his hands together, trying to look confident. "So we'll get a few burns, some smoke inhalation. We have 3 trauma bays. We can handle it." "You don't understand," Marcus's voice cracked. "Dispatch said catastrophic structural failure, deep underground, during a classified test. Secondary collapse trapped the response teams. County EMS was obliterated. The military's taken over jurisdiction." He swallowed hard. They said prepare for 60+ critical casualties. Imminent arrival." Denise let out a short, hysterical laugh. 60? Critical? We have 3 ventilators, 2 surgeons on call. We're a level 3 clinic. Panic detonated in the room. Reyes paced, running his hands through his hair, muttering about liability. Denise screamed contradictory orders at the junior nurses that left everyone paralyzed. The residents froze. Naomi closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, took a breath. When she opened them, the quiet wallflower of Trauma Bay 2 was gone. She reached up and pulled the pins from her bun. She shrugged off the oversized scrub jacket, revealing a tight black undershirt beneath, sleeves pushed up over forearms crisscrossed with pale, jagged scars. Blast scars, shrapnel burns, the record of a lifetime spent somewhere much worse than this. "Marcus." Her voice cracked off the tile walls like a whip. The charge nurse jumped. "Call the blood bank. Every unit of O negative they have, thawed, brought here in coolers, stairs, not the elevator, now." Who the hell do you think you are, Voss? Denise shrieked, face purple. You do not give orders in my... Naomi closed the distance in 2 strides, invading her space, eyes hard as flint. Denise, shut your mouth and get every crash cart lined up in the hallway right now, or people are going to die. Go. Denise, overwhelmed by the sheer predatory calm radiating off her, stumbled back and ran for the carts. Naomi turned to the doctors. Reyes, you take Bay 1. Airways only. Intubate, bag, move on, don't fixate. Pulseless and apneic for more than 3 minutes. They're black tagged. You leave them. Understood? You can't triage like that, Reyes shouted. This is a hospital, not a battlefield. Today it is. Naomi grabbed a handful of black Sharpies and tossed them to the residents. Triage outside the doors. Green to the cafeteria, yellow to pediatrics, red in the hallway. If you don't know what you're doing, get out of my way. Before Reyes could argue further, a sound began building outside, a low thrumming, a rhythmic chopping that vibrated in their teeth, growing into a deafening roar. The reinforced glass doors of the ambulance bay rattled furiously. Wind whipped into a violent frenzy, tearing signs from their posts, bending streetlights. Oh my God, Marcus whispered, staring at the security monitors. No ambulances. Instead, the sky over the parking lot was black with military aircraft. 2 massive CH-47 Chinooks holding high, 6 dark, unmarked UH-60 Black Hawks, descending in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Not medevac choppers painted white with red crosses. Matte black. No identifying numbers. The unmistakable signature of Joint Special Operations Command. The downwash was apocalyptic. It ripped the roof off the smoking shelter, flipped 2 parked sedans, shattered the hospital lobby's upper windows. Dust and debris churned into a blinding tornado across the lot. Naomi hit the manual override on the ambulance bay doors. They slid open, and the smell hit them instantly. Burning aviation fuel, superheated ozone, the coppery stench of massive blood loss. Gowns and gloves, she roared over the noise, grabbing a trauma bag she'd quietly packed 10 minutes earlier. Move! The first Black Hawk touched down. Before the wheels settled, the side doors kicked open. Men in heavy tactical gear, smeared with soot and blood, sprinted for the ER dragging litters of mangled bodies. Multicam uniforms, plate carriers, tactical headsets, suppressed short-barreled rifles slung tight to their chests. Not National Guard. Elite operators, their faces masks of pure, frantic desperation. I need a surgeon, the lead operator screamed, kicking a gurney through the sliding doors. A mountain of a man, his face painted with someone else's blood. On the litter, a soldier whose left leg ended in a horrific, ragged stump below the knee, the field tourniquet failing, blood pumping out in bright, rhythmic arcs. Dr. Reyes stepped forward, took one look at the volume of arterial blood, and froze completely. His hands went limp. His expensive education hadn't prepared him for this. Doctor, the operator roared, shoving him. He's bleeding out. Fix him. Reyes opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He backed away, trembling. Step aside, Reyes. Naomi's voice sliced through the chaos like a scalpel. She slid across the blood-slicked floor and dropped to her knees beside the gurney. No flinch at the gore. Hands moving with mechanical, terrifying speed. Hold pressure here. She physically guided the operator's massive gloved hands onto the femoral artery, ripping open a sterile pack, grabbing a hemostat, his femorals completely retracted, the field tourniquet slipping, mud and blood. Without waiting for a doctor, without asking permission, she plunged her bare-gloved fingers directly into the ragged wound cavity of the man's stump, digging through severed muscle tissue, her face a mask of absolute concentration, until she found the thick, pulsating hose of the severed femoral artery. Clamping, she locked the hemostat down. The geyser of blood stopped instantly. She looked up at Marcus. David, push a gram of TXA, hang 2 units of ONEG on the rapid infuser, and get me a bone injection gun for an IO line. Now. The massive operator staring down at her, was breathing hard. He read her name tag. N. Voss, RN. Then he looked at her face, at the jagged scars on her forearms, at the specific, uniquely tactical way she'd wrapped the clamp. His eyes widened. "Angel?" he whispered, voice cracking over the roar of the incoming choppers. Naomi didn't look up. "Keep pressure on the secondary bleed, Sergeant. I've got the main artery. You're supposed to be dead." He pulled off his helmet. "They said you died in Fallujah. They told us the Angel of Death was KIA in the insurgent raid." Dr. Reyes, still paralyzed against the wall, managed to choke out, What are you talking about? She's a floor nurse." The operator slowly stood, looked at Reyes with pure disgust, then back down at the woman kneeling in the blood. "Floor nurse?" he said softly. "That woman is Major Renata Sokol, former commander of the premier JSOC forward surgical team, the highest-rated combat trauma surgeon in the history of the United States military." The ER went completely still, save for the hum of the monitors. Denise dropped a tray of instruments. It clattered on the floor. Reyes looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Naomi finally looked up, locking eyes with the operator, expression deadly flat. "Renata Sokol died in the desert, Sergeant. My name is Naomi Voss, and unless you want this man to die on my floor, you're going to get on the radio, tell those other 7 birds to land, and get me a bone saw. Understood?" The operator snapped to attention, an instinct ingrained by years of combat. "Yes, ma'am." He keyed his radio. "Command, this is Viper 1. Medical controls established. You're clear to bring them all down. I repeat, bring them all down. The Angel is here." Outside, the 7 remaining Black Hawks flared their rotors, preparing to unleash a wave of casualties that would push the small suburban hospital to the absolute brink. And at the center of the storm, Naomi Voss wiped the blood from her forehead, picked up a scalpel, and prepared to go to war. The sliding doors of Mercy General's ambulance bay didn't close again for 3 agonizing hours. As the 7 remaining Black Hawks touched down in rapid, chaotic succession, the quiet suburban parking lot became a militarized forward operating base. The concussive roar of the rotors shattered the last of the lobby's structural glass, sending a blinding hurricane of dust and debris tearing through the pristine, sanitized corridors. Through the storm, the casualties poured in without mercy, strapped to folding canvas litters carried by operators with grim, hardened, soot-covered faces, others limping through on bleeding comrades, leaving thick red boot prints across the linoleum. 34 critical patients in total. A catastrophic, unmanageable number for a small Level 3 trauma center built for sprains and kitchen accidents. Naomi stood at the absolute epicenter of it, a flawless maestro conducting a symphony of controlled violence. "Bay 1! Massive facial trauma! Secure the airway!" she shouted, cutting cleanly through the cacophony. "Bay 2! Bilateral femur fractures! Pelvic binder! Rapid infuser! Now! The rest line up in the hallway. I want heavy-gauge IV access on every body in this building, right now." Dr. Reyes, still deathly pale from the sudden revelation of who he'd been mocking for weeks, stood frozen at the nurse's station as a heavily armored soldier was dumped onto a gurney in front of him, gasping violently, lips turning a terrifying, irreversible blue. I need an anesthesiologist," Reyes stammered, hands hovering uselessly over the man's chest. "His trachea's deviated. I can't tube him." Naomi materialized beside him like a phantom. She didn't yell. "Reyes, look at me." He snapped his terrified eyes to hers. "Tension pneumothorax," she said, with icy precision, pressing his trembling hand onto the soldier's rigid chest. Air's trapped in the pleural space, crushing his heart. He codes in 40 seconds. "You're a Johns Hopkins graduate. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Puncture it." "With what?" Reyes panicked. "We don't have a chest tube kit prepped." She grabbed a 14-gauge IV needle off the nearest cart and slapped it into his palm. "You don't need a tube. You need a hole. Do it. Now." He found the collarbone, counted down 2 rib spaces, and drove the needle in. A loud hiss of escaping air. The soldier took a massive, agonized gasp. The blue faded from his lips. Reyes stumbled back, staring at his blood-stained hands. He'd just saved a life with raw, improvised battlefield medicine. Good, Naomi said, already turning away. Now go to the man with the shrapnel in his shoulder. Move! Further down the hall, Denise stood backed into a corner, hyperventilating, as bleeding soldiers filled her once pristine hallway. Naomi grabbed her by the shoulders and hoisted her upright. I can't, Denise sobbed. There's too much blood. We don't have authorization. Paperwork is dead, Naomi cut in, grip tightening until Denise gasped. These men took a blast protecting whatever's buried under that mountain. Get to the blood bank coolers. Log every unit of O negative that goes into an IV. If you drop a single bag, I will end you. Understand? Denise looked into Naomi's eyes and saw the angel of death. She gave a terrified nod and bolted for the stairs. For 2 hours, Mercy General ran like a wartime slaughterhouse. Naomi moved with impossible, calculated speed, packing wounds with hemostatic gauze, directing the overwhelmed residents. The JSOC operators deferred to her without question. They remembered the legend. Just as the first wave began to stabilize, the ambulance bay doors were forced open one last time. 6 men in black tactical windbreakers marched in behind a tall man with silver hair in a tailored charcoal suit, flashing a badge with a gold seal and a barcode. I am Director Whitmore, DARPA Special Projects, he announced. This hospital is under federal quarantine. Nobody enters, nobody leaves. All communications are severed. The incident at Blue Ridge involved highly classified materials. A specialized surgical team from Walter Reed is 20 minutes out. Hold your positions! 20 minutes? Reyes interjected, his newfound confidence flaring. Half these men will bleed out by then. Whitmore's men slowly unholstered their weapons. Doctor, you will stand down. That's a direct order. Before Reyes could respond, a frantic shout from outside. Make a hole! We need a doc right now! 2 operators rushed in, dragging a reinforced military stretcher. On it, a man in the tattered remains of a 4-star general's uniform. He took secondary shrapnel from the payload casing, an operator yelled, voice cracking. They wheeled General Walter Briggs, Deputy Commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, into Trauma Bay 3. Naomi was already there, snapping on fresh gloves. Briggs was pale, breathing dangerously shallow, a jagged, blackened hole dead center of his chest, slightly left of the sternum. She threw an ultrasound wand onto his chest. Pericardial tamponade, she said grimly. The shrapnel pierced the sac around his heart. It's filling with blood. He's entering obstructive shock. Whitmore pushed into the bay. Stabilize him. Do not open him up. That shrapnel is highly classified kinetic ordnance. Naomi looked at the monitor. Blood pressure crashing. 50/30. He doesn't have 20 minutes. His heart stops right now. Keep him alive, nurse, Whitmore barked. But leave the ordnance. She peeled off her bloody gloves, snapped on a fresh pair, and didn't break eye contact. Reyes, number 10 scalpel, rib spreader, heavy trauma shears. Whitmore's face contorted. Step away from the general. That is an order. My name is Major Renata Sokol. Her voice dropped to a terrifying resonant register. I hold the highest surgical clearance in military history. If you don't get your trigger-happy agents out of my operating theater, this general dies and your name goes on the autopsy report. Whitmore opened his mouth, and the unmistakable clack of a rifle bolt chambering around cut him off. 4 blood-soaked JSOC operators stood in the doorway, suppressed rifles raised, aimed at his agents. You heard the major, suit, Sergeant Dax Coleman growled, eyes void of hesitation. Get the hell out of her way. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody in Trauma Bay 3 breathed. The lights hummed violently overhead. General Briggs's monitor let out a shrill, frantic chirp, his heart rate spiking to 160 as it fought the crushing pressure of blood pooling in his chest. Whitmore looked at the 4 operators, weapons dead steady, eyes locked on his men. He knew JSOC. He knew this tier of the military didn't play politics. They recognized 2 things, the mission and the people who kept them alive. To them, Renata Sokol wasn't a surgeon. She was a deity. Whitmore slowly raised his hands, palms out. His men stepped back, though their hands stayed near their holsters. If he dies on that table, Whitmore said, voice of venomous whisper, you'll spend the rest of your life in a black site, Major. He won't die, Naomi replied, turning her back on the armed men. Not today. She looked at Reyes. Scalpel. His hands shaking slightly, he slapped the number 10 blade into her palm. There was no time for anesthesia. No time for a sterile scrub. Briggs was unconscious, slipping fast. Marcus, push 100 mics of fentanyl and a paralytic, in case he wakes. Her eyes stayed locked on Briggs's chest. Reyes, you suction the blood. Don't let your hand shake. She positioned the blade at the center of his sternum. Without a single moment of hesitation, she pressed down and dragged the scalpel across the left side of his chest, following the curve of his ribs, slicing through skin, fat, and muscle in one swift, brutal motion. Blood welled up instantly. Shears. Reyes handed her the heavy trauma shears. She wedged the lower blade under the intercostal muscle, between the 4th and 5th ribs, and clamped down, severing the heavy, grisly tissue with a wet, sickening crunch that made Denise, watching from the doorway, turn away and gag. Rib spreader. She inserted the ratcheting device into the wound and, with 3 sharp, violent cranks, forced the general's ribs apart. The chest cavity lay open. Reyes gasped. The pericardial sac, the membrane encasing the heart, was swollen to the size of a grapefruit, dark purple, pulsing weakly. A jagged, smoking piece of black shrapnel the size of a golf ball was embedded directly in the sac, plugging its own hole. The metals superheated. Naomi's face hovered inches from the open chest. It cauterized the entry point, but the blunt force ruptured the cardiac wall internally. The sac is full of blood. You can't pull it out, Reyes panicked, staring at the alien-looking shrapnel. The second you remove that plug, the blood floods the chest, and he bleeds out in seconds. I know. She looked around the room. A level 3 trauma center didn't have a bypass machine. No synthetic cardiac patches. Nothing. Reyes, when I pull the shrapnel, I cut the sac to relieve the pressure. The blood erupts. You have exactly 2 seconds to suction the field so I can see the rupture on the heart muscle. And then what? Reyes cried. We don't have a patch. You can't suture a beating heart. She held up her left hand. I'm going to plug the hole. With my finger. Silence. Broken only by the failing, erratic beeping of the monitor. You're insane, Whitmore muttered from the corner. Scalpel. She took a breath. The armed men, the panicked doctors, the sirens outside, all of it faded into a single tunnel of focus. This was where she lived, the razor's edge between life and death, right hand gripping the jagged shrapnel, left hand holding the scalpel poised over the swollen sac. 3. Reyes gripped the suction tube, knuckles white. 2. She braced her feet against the bloody floor. 1. She yanked the shrapnel out and, in the same motion, slashed the sac open. It was like a dam bursting. A torrent of dark, deoxygenated blood exploded upward, splattering across her face and chest. Suction! Reyes shoved the tube into the pooling blood. For a split second, the Red Sea parted, revealing the wildly thrashing, damaged muscle of the general's heart, a ragged, inch-long tear in the left ventricle, pumping bright arterial blood with every beat. She dropped the scalpel and plunged her left hand, bare and raw, into the chest cavity. She wrapped her fingers around the slippery, beating heart of a 4-star general, felt the terrifying, violent rhythm of a human life against her palm, found the hole, and jammed her index finger directly into the tear. The geyser stopped instantly. The monitor, which had flatlined for 3 terrifying seconds, spiked and then settled into a rapid, stable rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Naomi stood there, arm buried to the wrist in the general's chest, her finger a living cork for a ruptured heart, covered head to toe in blood, eyes burning with intensity. She looked up at Reyes, who stared at her like she'd descended from the heavens. Now, she whispered, panting slightly, we get a needle and heavy silk suture, and you're going to sew a purse-string stitch around my finger. We pull it tight as I pull my finger out. Reyes nodded, entranced, and moved with a speed and precision he'd never possessed before, driven entirely by the gravity of the woman commanding him. For 20 minutes, Time stood still. He threw the stitches, tying knots with trembling but accurate hands, while she withdrew her finger millimeter by millimeter, letting the sutures close the gap behind it. When the final knot was tied, she pulled her hand free. The heart beat forcefully in the open chest. No leak. Sac closed. She exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Chest drain in. Let's close him up. As she finished wiring the sternum shut, the ambulance bay doors blew open one last time. A team of military surgeons from Walter Reed, in pristine scrubs, rushed the ER. The lead surgeon reached Bay 3, took one look at the open trauma kit, the blood on the floor, the perfectly stable patient on the monitor. "Who did this?" he demanded, astonished. "This is a battlefield clamshell. Who executed this?" Director Whitmore stepped forward, looking at Naomi with a mixture of profound awe and simmering anger. She did. Naomi didn't acknowledge the praise. She didn't look at the military surgeons. She stripped off her blood-soaked gloves, tossed them into the biohazard bin, and walked to the industrial sink in the corner, turning the water crimson as it spiraled down the drain. Whitmore walked over, voice low. "The Pentagon spent 3 years looking for you, Major. They thought you burned in that convoy outside Ramadi." Renata Sokol burned in that convoy. Her voice stayed flat, empty of emotion. She didn't look at him. She just kept scrubbing. She gave her country a decade of her life. She gave them her sanity. She gave them everything. And when she was done, she stayed dead. "You just saved the deputy commander of USASOC," Whitmore countered. "You can't hide anymore. We need you back. The world's getting darker, Major. We need the angel." She turned the water off, dried her scarred forearms with a paper towel, and looked at him, utterly unbothered by his authority. "I don't care about your wars, Director. I don't care about your classified projects. I'm done playing God in the desert." She walked past him, stopping at the doorway to look at Sergeant Coleman and the JSOC operators, who snapped to rigid attention. She gave them a slow, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement between people who'd shared the same hell. Then she looked at Reyes and Denise, standing perfectly still, staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Reyes," she said smoothly, "the general needs his antibiotics rotated every 4 hours. Denise, the trauma bay needs to be sterilized and restocked before the end of shift." Denise swallowed hard. "Yes, Nurse Voss." Naomi allowed a faint, almost imperceptible ghost of a smile. "Good," she said, stepping out into the chaotic, echoing hallway of the suburban hospital. "Because I'm on my coffee break." If you were on the edge of your seat during this one, hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves a hidden hero twist, and subscribe to Beyond the Silence Tales for more heart-pounding stories like it. What would you do if your quiet coworker turned out to be a covert military legend? Tell us in the comments below.
Hi, I'm Gwyneth Wynne, the owner and manager of Beyond the Silence Tales. No one knew the new nurse was a classified trauma legend until 8 helicopters landed at the ER. I'd really love to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stuck with me was the reminder that real ability doesn't always need attention to prove its worth. Sometimes the people who make the biggest impact are the ones working quietly, staying prepared, and showing up when they're needed most. What part of this story stood out to you the most? Have you ever met someone whose true strength surprised you once you got to know them? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story meant something to you, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more stories that spark thoughtful conversations.